How's it going, everybody out there? My name is Jakejames Lugo, and welcome to the channel. Now, I've reviewed a bunch of different Castlevania games here on the channel. If you've missed out on any of the videos I put up about the series, you definitely need to check out the playlist. But the game that we're looking at today is a remake of the very first Castlevania game from the NES, not normally the one that everybody thinks of. It was released over in Japan on a very different platform than the home consoles we're usually accustomed to, but it made its way to the United States in the form of a PlayStation 1 game called Castlevania Chronicles. So is it really the definitive version of the original Castlevania game? Is it the best remake of Castlevania that's out there? Let's find out together. This is Castlevania Chronicles for the PlayStation 1. Castlevania Chronicles is a remake of the original Castlevania game for the NES. The crazy thing here, however, is that it's not just one remake of Castlevania, but it's actually two. What's included in Castlevania Chronicles is a port of the Sharp X6 8000 home computer version released in Japan in 1993. That version was called Akumaju Dracula, but you're also getting a remixed arranged version of that same game within Castlevania Chronicles. This means new visuals, new music, and more vampire hunting action. The character redesigns for Simon Belmont, Dracula, and many other characters were done by Ayami Kojima, who also went on to do the character designs for Castlevania Symphony of the Night and many other entries of the series later on. So is this a definitive version of the first Castlevania game? Possibly, but it's more than just a simple copy and repaste of an iconic game. From the very get-go, this is a huge step up over the original Castlevania that was on the NES. We get a whole bunch of new visuals with the backgrounds, a whole bunch of redesigns for a lot of the monsters you encounter, and a whole bunch of different character designs that give an overall new look to a lot of the characters we come to know. Now, I understand that Super Castlevania 4 on the SNES did something very similar to this. That's another remake of the original Castlevania game, but I feel like a strong case can be made for this version being the actual definitive version as far as remakes are concerned. Because some of the same people that worked on this game also worked on Castlevania Symphony of the Night, there's a lot of parallels there with the way that characters look, the art style, a lot of the color choices and the palette with the backgrounds and some other characters. There's a lot of cool stuff that's going on here. What I think is really cool is that some of the classic stages from the original game have been redesigned, and we've been given a few other original stages that not only pad out the game a little bit more, that makes it a little bit longer, but overall, these stages just look very good. They're very fun to play through. There are some recognizable landmarks and things in the background that longtime fans are really going to spot and love about this, but again, these redesigns for these classic stages and just the overall presentation of this game is a huge step up over the original Castlevania, and I really appreciate that as a longtime fan. So outside all the visuals and the presentation and all this other stuff, let's talk about the gameplay, which I feel like is very important with this remake of Castlevania, because unlike the other remake that's out there for the SNES, there's some other really interesting stuff going on here. Castlevania Chronicles follows the same formula as the original NES game very closely. However, there's more stages, enemies, and other additions that the NES game never had. I'm going to focus more on the arranged remix version that's included in this package, more so than the original one, because that's the most updated version. But everything that I say can be applied to the original version as well. The main difference between the two is a spike in difficulty and a few visual changes here and there. The game starts off like the original NES Castlevania, with Simon Belmont beginning his journey into Dracula's castle, but things eventually take a wild turn. There are many familiar locations that fans will immediately recognize, but all of them have been given a visual upgrade. There's more detail in the backgrounds and platforms to traverse around within a stage. Simon uses his famous vampire killer whip that can be powered up to kill enemies, but he also has all of his sub-weapons from throughout the series that uses up hearts that you find all over the place. However, we also get a few new sub-weapons that can add another layer of strategy to the action. Picking up the Laurel will allow you to heal yourself for 10 hearts, giving you the extra boost needed in those very tough sections of the game. If you thought the bosses were tough in the NES game, they're back again and just as deadly and intimidating here. There's also a few new bosses from other Castlevania games, like the werewolf fight from Super Castlevania 4. As a whole, the game is difficult and will test your platforming skills and patience very well, so don't think this is going to be a walk in the park. Luckily, if you die and get a game over, you could save and restart from the current stage. Overall, this is definitely a step up from the NES Castlevania release, and I really can't complain about that. Everything that was good about it was improved upon and made better in here. The core gameplay of Castlevania Chronicles remains faithful to the original NES game, but all these little enhancements and little changes take all the best parts of that game and just make them better overall, with a few exceptions, of course. My biggest criticism about Castlevania Chronicles is that you're not able to whip in all 8 directions. You actually can't whip above you or above you in diagonal. You can only do it in front of you or down below you or down in diagonal, which seems a little bit weird. The main reason for this being is because you're not actually able to whip upward because the sub-weapon input is actually up and attack, much like how it is in the original NES game. This is something that Super Castlevania 4 got right, where you're able to whip in all different directions, while the sub-weapons are actually mapped to the shoulder buttons, which I wish was the case with Castlevania Chronicles. There's all these different buttons on the controller for the PlayStation 1, and I don't understand why they couldn't just put the sub-weapon usage or any other like stuff with just the shoulder buttons, as opposed to just limiting me for the types of attacks that I can actually do. The other thing I want to mention that's very damn cool is that the boss fights in this game are awesome. We get all the original bosses from the first game, but we also get a few more additional bosses that are added in from later games in the series, like the werewolf and a few others here and there. They're not only challenging and will really test your patience and your skills with platforming, but they also look visually pleasing. They work well with all the different stuff going on in the backgrounds, and just the overall design for them are just pretty damn freaking awesome. One other thing I do want to touch on is that you get an additional sub-weapon in this game called the Laurel. Now, this isn't a weapon you can use against enemies, it actually heals you for 10 hearts. This changes up a lot of stuff with the gameplay because it adds an extra layer of strategy, especially with some of the later bosses in the game. If you want to actually go in there and be able to heal yourself, you're able to do that now. Beforehand, that wasn't the case. Some of the bosses in the later stages right before Dracula's castle aren't as hard now with the use of the Laurel because you can heal yourself, but they still provide enough of a challenge to be fun. So with gameplay put to the side, again, I really enjoy the gameplay that's here. Let's talk about my favorite aspect of the Castlevania series, and thank God I could actually talk positive about this thing. Let's talk about the music of Castlevania Chronicles, because man, that music is so goddamn good. Yes! Yes, son!
If you wanted great music with awesome remixes, then Castlevania Chronicles knocks it out of the park. The soundtrack here is fantastic, with a variety of iconic tracks from the NES game getting remixed along with a few others from later games in the series. Fans will definitely recognize versions of Bloody Tears from Castlevania 3, the iconic Vampire Killer theme from the original NES game, and a really cool version of Simon's theme from Super Castlevania 4. There are a few original tracks that complement the remixes, but the remixes steal the show here. I'm sorry, but when you hear the super hyped up version of Vampire Killer at the start of the game, it trumps almost everything else that you hear. But my favorite is the new version of Simon's theme for the final stage of the game. It sounds great and feels epic as you make your way through the final stage up to Dracula's throne room. Listen to this and you'll see exactly where I'm coming from. It just works so good in this soundtrack.
Finally, we get back onto some good Castlevania music, and we can wipe away all the stuff that Harmony of Dissonance gave us. I really dig the soundtrack of Castlevania Chronicles. I love just the way that the music sounds. This to me is just like how Castlevania should sound. It's got action elements to it, it's got a little bit of dance and techno, it just makes everything just that much more exciting. And the cool thing about Castlevania Chronicles and its music is that it takes a couple of iconic tracks and remixes them a few times, which sound really freaking good, but it also implements a couple other tracks from later games in the series that just sound just as good, man. Like, this just is awesome to listen to. Again, there's some original tracks in here and they do sound great as well, but it's always the iconic tracks and just the way that they're kind of like changed up, remixed, and they sound a little bit different while still being like vaguely familiar that just steal the show. Like, listen to the Vampire Killer remix or the Simon's Theme remix. It just sounds freaking good. And that's the thing I love about the Castlevania series. It reuses a lot of like original tracks again and again in different games, but it always presents it to you in a very different fashion every single time. And I love that. You'll vaguely recognize like some of the familiar melodies and stuff here and there, but again, once you listen to it, even though it's essentially the same track, you'll still love listening to it because it just sounds different for the context that it's presented. And I think that's very well done. Now, the other thing I want to touch on is some of the extra bonus content that's included in Castlevania Chronicles. Granted, there is some stuff here, but it's not really a lot, it's just kind of there.
There are a few pieces of extra content in Castlevania Chronicles, but it's still a meager offering that could have been better. You can unlock artwork in the gallery for each stage that you complete in Arranged mode, which are character designs from Ayami Kojima that range from this game and even Castlevania Symphony of the Night. There's also an interview with the producer of the game, as well as a time attack mode to play through everything again. But beyond that, there's nothing else here. I wish there could have been some extra content like in Symphony of the Night that allowed me to play as another character or even a boss rush mode. I think that could have been cool. But for an original PlayStation game that remixes and revitalizes a classic, I still think it's pretty good for what's here. I just wish they could have offered me a little bit more of a reward for completing it.
While I think it's totally fine with the bonus content that's already there for Castlevania Chronicles, I really do wish that there was more there to enjoy. I feel like for remakes and reimaginings, they should actually celebrate the series and the legacy of the series that they're reimagining, especially for the people that have stuck with it for so long. The majority of people that are going to play Castlevania Chronicles have probably already played most of the Castlevania games in the series, or at least have been playing ever since the NES days from the very first Castlevania game. I say the same thing for a lot of different compilations of games that really celebrate like iconic series and video games, because I feel like, again, you want to reward the longtime fans. You want to be able to give them something more for sticking with you for so many years, especially for a series like Castlevania, who's been, around since like the late 80s. Even so, at least we're still getting something here, and again, like a lot of this stuff is really tangential to Castlevania Symphony of the Night, since most of the people that worked on this game worked on that one as well. I mean, we're getting something, but I really do wish there was a little bit more there for me to enjoy. So overall, did I enjoy Castlevania Chronicles, and do I think it's the definitive remake of the first Castlevania game? While I think that the visual presentation is awesome, all the different additions to the gameplay is pretty damn cool, and the music soundtrack is phenomenal, I still think that a case could be made that this is not the definitive remake of the first game. A lot of people will probably say that Super Castlevania 4 is probably the better remake, but I think a case could be made for both games here and there. There's a lot of pros and cons between the two of them, stuff that you could do in one and that you can't do in the other, but I still really enjoy what's being offered here in Castlevania Chronicles. If you're a fan of Castlevania and you just wanted to revisit the original game without having to go back to the NES, this is a great way to do so, because not only is the visuals and the presentation, the music and the gameplay like really on point, this is just a different way of seeing something that's considered an iconic classic. Anyway guys, those are my thoughts on Castlevania Chronicles on the PlayStation 1. Hopefully you enjoyed all my thoughts on there. Again, as a longtime Castlevania fan and who's been someone playing all these games here and there, I really enjoy going through this one. I think it's just pretty damn cool, despite my little criticisms here and there. Regardless though, those are my thoughts, so let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Tell me, do you think Castlevania Chronicles is the definitive remake of the first Castlevania game? Do you like a different Castlevania game? Do you think that it's complete garbage? Let me know what's up in the comment section down below. And of course, don't forget to leave a like on this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more videos just like this one. I have more reviews, more podcast talk shows, more vlogs, a whole bunch of stuff that I know you guys are going to enjoy. And don't forget guys, I am on Patreon. In the description box down below, you guys could go check out my Patreon page. At the $1 level or higher, you're going to get a ton of exclusive content, including early access to new videos, exclusive podcast talk shows, and a whole bunch of other great stuff you guys will definitely enjoy. I highly encourage you guys to check it out. Link in the description box down below. Anyway, that's all I got for you. I will talk to all of you guys again very soon. Peace out, and stay epic, everybody.
Thanks for watching this video, everyone. Make sure you guys check out some of these other videos in the boxes after the credits, and don't forget to visit my Patreon page via the annotations for more exclusive content. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel as well. Peace out, and stay epic, everybody.